Hello, this is Katie McGivens. Welcome to episode 3 of the Bounty Bay Reunion, where 6 authors, all who appeared as characters in my novel The Body in Bounty Bay, gathered to talk about the challenges of being a writer. Today we discuss writing a series. We invite you to listen in.
The question is, do readers like series, and will they read them if they are not? And I found this an extremely interesting question because it had never occurred to me. So, also, years ago, and I think this is still the case, they used to talk about marketing a series by focusing on book 1 and praying for read-through. And I'm sure we've all heard that advice. And so that is what I've been doing without really knowing if I'm doing the right thing or not, but that's certainly the advice I have received. And I rarely push the other books in the series, just occasionally to let people know that there's more than one book. Based on all of this, I'm pretty sure I am going to wrap this up after book 6 and publish it as a sextology. I was also on a couple of reader feeds this morning, and there were a couple of slightly alarming comments. One was somebody complained that too many new authors don't finish what they promise. It's often because the first book has flopped or didn't perform to their expectations, but it's not worth the risk of being left hanging, said one of these people. Another person said, I read a book released in 2017 and a sequel was promised, but it was only released this year, 6 years later. And she said, I still haven't read it and I don't plan to, at least not in the near future. I mean, it depends why you're doing it, right? Like, there was no way I could stop after book 1, even though I had never intended to write a series, because I was in love with these characters and I had at least 4 other social consciousness points that I wanted to make. And so, yeah, I wasn't going to stop for myself. So it depends what our goal is, you know? If we are doing this because we can't help ourselves, because we love our characters, because it is fulfilling, and all of those wonderful, you know, deeply embedded authorial, passionate things that you know, come into this as well, you know, that's great. If we are talking about this from a marketing perspective, I think these are some of the things that I've been mentioning might be worth considering.
I don't think any of us should be letting the winds of change, or fans saying this or fans saying that, or social media, or what's in, what's out, what publishers are saying. I think we're letting too many of these other things distract us from what we should be doing, which is enjoying our writing and writing as the characters inspire us, as the characters demand, because I feel that characters come alive and they want their stories told. And I think we should again let our inspiration drive us.
The one thing I want to say about series is I have read, I think most of you, Fiona, I've got to get to your books. But what I have found is I can pick up anywhere in your series, and I'm not missing anything by having not read the previous books. They stand alone on their own. They are enjoyable reads. If anything, reading something in the middle of a series, and I think I did that with you, Joanne, made me want to go back and read the others. So that's why when I market my books on Twitter and on IG and on Blue Sky, I market the individual book. Occasionally I put out the fact that I have, you know, these 11 published, but more often or not, I'm just marketing one individual, like the books as individuals, so that people will pick them up and read them. And I've had people pick up just my last 2 and go, oh my God, they're great. I want to go back and find out, you know, why does Miles' eyes bother him? Why does this, you know, happen? They want to go back and just discover it, because I think all of us put enough in our books to make people aware of, oh, there's something that happened before, but reading this particular book, they're not missing out on anything.
Mm.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, standalones. And
Yes.
it can work as a standalone as well.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to say how useful this discussion is for me, because I'm only on the third of a series. And one of the things, well, and I think we all share a lot in common in terms of our motivation, being in loving our characters, feeling inspired by their stories, wanting to continue them. And I too never intended for my first book to become the first book in a series. But it has, and I think because of that motivation of wanting to know more about my characters and where the trajectory of their lives. But one thing I do worry about, I'm so glad you addressed this, Wendy, is that when you do a series, how do you sort of make the transition between, or to align having a standalone book that is readable to a reader who hasn't read the previous books in the series, and keeping it interesting? And I think some of the series that I've read, and these are traditionally published books, they seem to go one way or the other. There's either too much prior information, in which case it gets a little boring, or there's not enough, which makes you wonder too much about why is something happening.
I've read the Ian Rankin books. He writes the Inspector Rebus series. You must have heard of them. Okay. And I've picked them up at different times and points in the Inspector Rebus timeline. And I think Ian Rankin does this very well. The main focus is on the story, the plot, or the murder, or whatever it is, the main thing of what is happening. So your reader's focus is on that. And then you learn, if you are not familiar with Rebus, let's take him as our example, you learn about him because Ian Rankin very carefully drops tiny bits of information, but it's important back history information without overpowering, without flooding the pages with info dumps. He does it very carefully and very subtly. And I think that is the art of it. Is the main focus is on the story as if it were a standalone story, but every murder is different, every plot is different, every crime is new. And he just maintains the reader's interest in the characters.
Yes.
This comes at a really great time because I've started to write the fourth book, which will be the end. And it's, how do you inform the new reader without boring the one who's read the entire series? And it's not easy. And you use the word skill, Fiona, and it is an art and a skill and an ability. And I'm thinking I'm getting it, but at the same time, I'm stuck with wanting to give everybody the information right from the beginning, so they know what they're dealing with, but not overwhelming people where they're going, okay, who is this character and how's that person related? Because as you write a series, with a mystery series, you got your main reoccurring characters, and then you've got the add-ons that you bring in for that particular story, and then you can discard them. And so you still have your main gang. But I have to keep, with this series, and Wendy, you do the same, you have to keep accumulating people to keep track of. And so I started, for the first time on the third book, to actually include a who's who of who these characters are, and then their relations, basic sort of information. And I think you're right. We have to look at ourselves and the spark and the interest, and what new story you can tell, what new element you can bring to your tale, or else it just becomes drudgery.
Being honest with ourselves, to look at them and say,
Yeah.
okay, this is the end. or I have 10 more stories in me and things are moving along smoothly and I'm able to address these issues, like not information dumping, which is a huge turnoff for me.
Well, characters change. Like Wendy's characters have moved out of one historical period and they're moving into another, and there will be different elements that come into that. With Katie, God forbid anything should happen to Jim, but that would definitely change the course and the flavor of your stories. So it's when the characters are all the same and they stay the same and they don't grow and they don't evolve. That's when characters.
And I think that's something that we all do very well, is that our characters evolve. They age, their perceptions change, their attitudes change, or they adapt. And I think we all do that extremely well. And that, what to me helps a story grow, and you can carry on to the next book. It is an art to give just enough information and not too much. Now, I've had a couple of, I'll call them millennial writers, who have come into my direct messages and said, how can you possibly write a series? You know, I would get so bored. And I said, well, you have to have a passion for your characters to carry them on. If you're getting bored with your characters, you shouldn't be writing a series.
Tell me, did anybody ever get tired of Sherlock Holmes?
No,
I don't know.
No.
I don't know how many books, adventures,
Joanne.
but everybody loves Sherlock Holmes. The movies, the TV series, the variety of options. Now that's one character that's iconic. We all love him, and we all read. I mean, I'll read any new version of, or I'll watch any new TV series or movie about. So I think it's to create our characters that become iconic, that stand head and shoulders above the cannon fodder that is unfortunately being produced at the moment.
Oh, I love that term, cannon fodder. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the Miss Marples and the Hercule Poirots and, you know, so many others that just continue. Of course, they have to be extremely well written as well. So I have read 2 series that stopped. I mean, the author said, okay, this is going to be the last book. And what even though well written, what the author did was they wanted to obviously be over it. They were done. They had made the decision. They were going to stop. And in both cases, this was like a 3rd book, the end. And they either digressed off into the wilderness, or they ended in such a way that the 3rd book was disappointing. And I wanted to say, look, you had a good thing going here. And I understand that you don't want to do the series anymore, but it's almost like they were speeding through to say, oh yeah, she got married, they had kids, lived happily ever after, the end, you know. And so I think if you're going to end a series, treat it like it was the very first book you ever wrote as well. You know, make sure it's got all the bells and whistles and what we loved about the characters to begin with. That's the one thing. Now, if I ever stopped the Katie Porter series, I think Wendy would stop ever speaking to me again.
Yes. Well, I might have to consider it. I'll try and talk you back into it.
One thing that I worry about is I feel that my books are more character studies than they are plot centered. And I worry if that's boring. The character part of it is the most interesting part to me. I try to put them in different situations that either illuminate or reveal their characters to the reader and to themselves. And that is how I've envisioned the entire series, how they come to understand themselves and the people that they live with and love. But I do worry that it lacks some kind of excitement or interest. I do plan to sort of change up the venue at some point in the next book, and I try to do that a little bit. I try to change the areas of law a little bit, or retain the ones that I think people have found interesting, or that I have. But I do consider them more of a character study than I do consider them to be plot related. And that worries me, reader interest.
Harriet, and Harriet, I think that's what is so good about your books, because your characters have internal struggles that they come to realize through that. And I think what's neat about that is we all do. All readers have that. And so they can see themselves in your very relatable characters and all their flaws and all their compassions and all their empathies and all of that. And I think books do well that let people identify with the character and see the character work through the same struggles that they themselves are probably having. So, and those are, for me, that would be a hard story to write, but you do it extremely well. And I really sympathize with Abigail, especially, and the surrounding characters, especially in the first book, which was very much about internal struggles. So I think you've hit on something that's really good and very relatable to the readers.
I was interviewed on this podcast. That was one of the questions, right? You know, writing the series or why. And I like that you can have the characters, you sort of live with the characters a bit longer, but also in terms of marketing. And this was something I had, when I was doing research about writing mysteries, people often like a series. You know, they don't just want a one-off. And you can obviously sell more books, but you also get to spend more time with these characters. And I've tried to vary the locations. So the first book, which is being published Tuesday, is in the small town in the Ozarks, but the second one is a riverboat cruise on the Mississippi. And the third book probably would be back in the small town, although I was talking to a German friend of mine and she thought maybe it should be in Germany, but I don't know. But I think that does really help you with
Germany, you
marketing
can write it
if
off.
you have this whole series. And also, I guess if you have other books too, but and you can say, okay, read this book, and then there's a next one coming. So they were asking me on the podcast, you know, how do you research? I mean, I'm lived in Europe so long, so I set the book in the U.S., my mystery in the Ozark Mountains, and I had been there, so it's a fictional version of a place. I mean, but of course, my Cage Time historical fiction book is 1930s New York, which I did not live in. My uncle grew up then and there, and I spent a lot of time with him over many years. So he gave me some, you know, idea, but obviously I didn't go there. So that was fun to research, but that is a really big challenge. But otherwise, I love doing the research about different places. Or when I wrote the Mississippi book, Murder on the Mississippi, I did do a drive at least down the Mississippi, and I've been to many of those places, but some of them I hadn't. So you do the best you can. But I mean, these days you can research so much, and I guess you can hopefully write it that it sounds like you were there, or even if it's not 100%, because I guess a lot of your readers haven't been there either. So
the learning curve, it isn't a curve; it's more of a like straight up.
To cut to the chase, I think we should be guided by our creative spark, our characters, and what makes us happy.